In this lesson we'll be creating this braid pendant here, and I'll be showing you two ways in which to accomplish this. Let's create a new file and part. I will use the generic template. Now when I'm creating a braid pattern, the first thing I like to do is look for geometric patterns within the braid. In this case I can see that the braid is contained with some squares. So I'm going to insert a sketch on my top datum plane. Okay, I'm going to start off with a square that I can see around the outside of this braid shape. And I'll give it some dimensions. (40mm squared). Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is break this up into a grid. Okay, again this also is a strategy I like to take when creating braids. I'm using the 2-point line to split this square into 4 segments vertically, and I'll do the same horizontally. Okay, I'll just mirror these ones across. Okay, so here we have our grid, and I'm going to erase these dimensions. Okay, now I will rotate everything about the origin, and I want to rotate it 45 degrees, an eighth of a rotation. Okay, so the way I see it is we have these arcs which can be created using circles. Okay, so first of all I see the 2 circles or arcs at the top and the bottom of the pendant, so I'm going to create these. I'll place a circle and I'll use the 3-point method because I know that I want the circle to be touching at the midpoint here, so that we have a circle entirely within this segment, this little grid square. So I'm going to right click the first point along this edge, and I want to set it at 12.5%. And the same for the other points, 12.5%, to get into the middle of this line here. Okay, so here is this circle. It has a radius or a diameter of 10mm. Okay, so now I'm going to look at how this pattern will flow. Okay, so I can see how if I just trim away these parts, I'll trim away these parts as well. I'll trim away this part, and we can trim these as well. So now I can see how the top of this is going to work. It's going to flow along this line. I'm going to need an arc in here, flow back down to another arc, come around the bottom, and back. Okay, so I can see that there's a series of circles that are needed within these grids. So let's first of all mirror this one across, because I can see the symmetry that we will have. And we can trim out again. So then I will follow this, looking at the braid pattern to help me. See that I will need a circle within this grid space. So we'll place another circle using the same method, but we have to use different inputting options since we have a different sized line. Alternatively, since I know the radius of these circles needs to be 5 millimeters or 10 millimeters in diameter, I can use my radius option as long as I can find the center. Again, I'm able to snap to the center of this grid space, and I can set the radius to be 5. Okay, and I'll use my trim again. Let's erase this diameter or radius. Okay, so here is the pattern. I'm building it up. Okay, so we'll need another circle in here, a circle in here, and a circle in here. But I can see that we have symmetry, so I'm going to mirror this circle that I created here. Mirror. And again. And now I'll trim. Okay, it looks like I trimmed out too much before. I need a line in there. Okay, so this is the pattern for the braid, the curve pattern for the braid. Okay, so it may seem a bit confusing building up this pattern, but all is required is to study the original pattern and form some kind of geometric pattern from that. And as I've said, I like to use grids. They seem to help me when creating the braid. Okay, so one thing I'm going to do before we exit back out into part level, is I want to trim, or split I should say, this arc in the middle. And the reason for this will become clear later on. And I'll do the same for the bottom one. Okay, so now I will exit back into my part level. And here is our braid pattern with the curve. Okay, first of all I'm going to project it to the face, to the datum plane, to turn this sketch into 3D curves so that I have the same curves that I was using in the sketch environment. Okay, so now we have broken up into those curves that we created. Okay, so the first strategy I'll show you to create the braid is that we will loft a shape around these curves, and then we will use the morph command to create the overlaps for our braid. Okay, but the end goal of this braid pendant, we want to be able to modify it. So I'm going to set up a scale for this curve so that we can scale our pendant up and down. So I'm going to insert a variable, and I'll call this scale factor, and I'll give it a value of 1 to start with. Okay, remember, we don't want to have spaces within our variable, otherwise they will not work. Okay, so we have a scale factor variable. I'll then use my scale command. I want to window pick all of the curves. I'm having a uniform scale. Let's check that it's working. It is. I'm going to set the scale to expression, pick variable, scale factor. Okay, so the scale factor is 1 at the moment, so we won't have a scale. But if we add that to our driving parameters, we should be able to see a scale in our curves, and we do. Okay, so the next step is insert a datum at the point where we split these end curves. So I'm going to let it snap in there with my entity filter set to curve, let it snap to the end point, If we want to be sure, we can set our pick option to critical. It snaps in there, won't let me pick anywhere else. Let's take away the XY axis. Confirm. Okay, so I'm going to be inserting a sketch in here that we will sweep along our curves. Again, these curves are broken up at the moment. Okay, so I want to concatenate. I'm going to concatenate into two curves. We want two halves. That's one half. Again, since we have tangencies all the way along, there should not be an issue with our concatenate. Okay, and I'm concatenating the other half. Okay, so these are the two sweeping curves that we will use. The sweep paths. So let's insert a sketch to sweep along. Show target. I'm going to insert a line and I'll constrain it to the origin using the point to midpoint constraint. Now I'll give it a dimension. Let's say 2.5. Okay, maybe I can increase that to a 3. Okay, and now we'll build up our sketch that we want to sweep around our braid. I'm going to start off by bringing in two sidewalls. Which I will dimension. Again, they're both related to one another, linked up to each other, so they should stay the same. I'll change my step size. Okay, in the pendant image that we have, I can see there are 4 arcs on our profile. So an arc here, gap, arc, gap, arc, gap, arc. So I'm going to create these arcs so that they may be modifiable. I'll start off with a line across here. I'm then going to come in with some points on the curve, and I want to split it up into several segments, so I'm going to place several points to use as the splitting points. So we have an arc, a gap, an arc, gap, arc, so we need one more point. Trim, split at point, pick the curve, and I'll pick the points. Confirm. Okay, we can erase the points. I'll use my picking to pick only the points. Delete. Okay, I'm going to erase these constraints. Okay, so here are our segments. Okay, I can see that we don't have a constraint connecting these two, so I'll add that in. Point coincident. The constraint is signified by that blue dot. That's what we want to see. So repeat it. Repeat here. Okay, I'm going to delete this dimension, our width dimension, since we'll be controlling it with the dimensions of these individual segments. So I'm going to dimension these. Right click, insert dimension. Let's say 0.5. And this one, the gap, I'll give it a different dimension. Let's say 0.4. This is the arc. I want to link it up to be equal to this value. This one equal to our separation value. Okay, so here are our dimensions. I'm going to grey these ones out because we know they're only linked up. We don't need to change them. Okay, so when I change one of these, you should see a change in the others. We do. Okay, so this will be the diameter of our arc. The separation of our arc, same thing. Okay, so let's add in those arcs. Sketch, arc. Okay, I'm using my snapping constraints. Okay, now these arcs have come in with dimensions, with a radius, but we know if we increase the radius, or the diameter here, this radius needs to increase as well, which it will not be able to do with this current dimension. So I'll show you what I mean. If we increase, we get a inconsistent or over-defined sketch. So I need to either erase these dimensions or toggle them to reference dimensions. So then when I increase my value, well, that shouldn't happen. I need to put in some horizontal constraints prior to playing with that. Let's try again. Okay, so this is the effect we want to see. Okay, but we want these points to be on the line, so we'll have to add in a constraint for them. Okay, we can test it again, see if it's working. Okay, this is the effect that we want. So when we increase this value, which is 2 times the arc radius, we're increasing the size of the arc as well and the width of our overall sketch. And we have the separation with the same kind of effect. Okay, so this is looking good. Let's check our height is working. It is. Okay, so we'll be setting up variables for each of these 3 dimensions here. And I will make these radiuses grey just to tidy up my sketch. Okay, so let's exit back out into our part level. Okay, I can see I've made one mistake there. Come back into a sketch. I need to make some of these lines here, turn them into reference geometry. So I'm control picking them all. Right click, toggle. Okay, so now they are our reference geometry and we have a complete closed shape. Okay, so let's insert those variables so we can link them up. Let's call the first one braid height, and we'll give it a value of 1.25. Middle click to add a new variable. Okay, so this one we'll call the braid arc radius, and let's say 0.2. And the final one, braid arc separation, and we'll say 0.5. Confirm. Come back into our sketch and we'll link these values up. So the first one, double click, select variable, navigate to the variables. This one was the braid height. You see it update. This one. Okay, so this is the braid arc diameter, but we have a variable for the braid arc radius. So this value has to be the braid arc radius multiplied by 2 for the diameter. Okay, so the diameter is 0.4, the radius 0.2. This one, the separation. Okay, so that is all linked up now. Come back into our part level, attributes part, driving parameters, and we'll add in these variables: height, radius, separation. Apply, confirm. Okay, so now we can use our sweep. We're going to sweep this sketch along our two curves. Shape, sweep, pick the profile is this sketch, the path is the curve. Okay, we'll keep the end caps and we will keep the curves. Confirm. Okay, now we could just mirror this across the other side. I'm going to perform another sweep. You have the sketch because we kept the curves, the path. Okay, let's create this as a base. We do not want to boolean add it. Keep the end caps, but we do not need to keep the curves this time. Confirm. Let's save. Okay, so here's our shape for the pendant. We just need to create the overlaps. Let's check that our variables are working. How about if we increase the scale factor? Okay, so that updates. How about the braid arc radius? Let's set it to be 0.3. This should change the overall width as well. It does. Separation. Okay, and our height. Okay, so our variables are working so far. Now let's come in with our first method for creating our braid overlap, which is using the morph with point command. Okay, we'll be using our first option, translate along a direction. Okay, the geometry you pick as the shape or one of the shapes. The point, okay, so we're going to pick some points. We'll come into a top view, set our entity filter onto face, so we're picking faces, and we want to morph this point. Okay, for some reason it's not letting me pick the face. I have my entity filter set to critical, so make sure it is back on entity, so that we can pick on the entity. Okay, so we want to morph this point. Okay, and we want to morph it in the Z direction, upwards, and we want to give it a value. Let's start off with 1 millimeter. Now, as it is, we're morphing too much of the shape, so we want to localize this morph, which means we need to bring down the influence. Okay, so if we drop it to a 10, okay, you can see we're localizing this morph to the area that we want. Okay, there's other options to play with. I'm going to leave them as they are. Okay, let's leave it at this at the moment. We will set up variables for our distance. We could also set up a variable for the influence. I'm going to pick a few more points. Okay, so we're having this one come over the top. That means this part goes under. So this needs to go over the top. This one under. This one over the top. Under. Over. Under, over. Okay, So this is the first morph. Now I'm going to insert those variables. So let's call the first one overlap offset. We'll set it to be 1 millimeter. Middle click, and let's say next one overlap influence and 7. We'll redefine the last operation. Hook up the variables. Confirm. Add them to our attributes panel. Okay, and we'll morph some more now. Morph with points. The geometry, let's pick the same shape that we just morphed. Okay, now let's do a negative morph. Okay, so the point, you know this part we need to do negative, so the direction, negative z, distance, expression, overlap offset. There you see it go down. Influence, let's link this up to the expression, overlap influence. Okay, we had 2 values pop in, just need 1. Okay, we'll pick a few more points. So we know this needs to go down, so do these 2 points, and then this point. Confirm. Okay, so our braid is taking shape. Okay, so let's now morph the other side. Pick the shape. Start off with the positive, distance, expression, the offset, same for the influence, expression, the influence. Now we can pick our points, come to a top view. Okay, so we're morphing upwards. Now we need to morph these ones up. This point, the opposite point, and these 2 points are morphed up as well. Okay, so here we're forming our overlap. Confirm. Here is the overlap taking shape. So we need 1 more morph. Middle click, geometry, the same shape. Direction, this time in the negative z. Distance, expression again. And same here. In fact, when we're in our variable browser, we just need to click in the field, then in the variable, and it will automatically link that up. So pick the points now. From the underside, okay, it's a little bit disorientating. It's these points here. Confirm. Okay, we'll check our overlaps. These are all looking good. I'll save. Okay, now let's test out the overlap. So currently they're kind of intersecting a bit, which isn't really a problem, but we can increase our offset, try and separate these out. Okay, and there he goes. Okay, so there's our braid. Let's check if the scale will work. Scale it up 1.5. Okay, it's still in there, it's okay. How about 0.5? Yes, that's still coming along. Okay, so this is one method for creating the braid pendant with our variables in there. We can come in at the end and add our two parts together. Okay, combine, add them. To create one shape, and then we can come in with our pendant bail. Okay, so this is one method. Now I'm going to show you a different method. Okay, so in the second method, instead of overlapping when we have the shape, we'll be forming the overlap when we have the curves. Okay, when we have these curves, we'll offset these to create the overlap, so when we sweep they're already overlapping. So I'll come back prior to my concatenate. Okay, so this time I'm back to my original curves. Now the first thing I'm going to do is insert a 2-point line at the intersection of these 2 points. Set my entity filter onto curve. The first point, right click for the input options, intersection of these 2 lines. So we have it nailed there. The second point, I want to do a right click, offset distance, the reference point, right click, intersection to get it, the reference point at the center, the direction in the z-axis. Okay, and the distance I'm going to link up to the variable overlap offset. Okay, so here we have this curve linked up to the overlap offset. Okay, next up I'm going to mirror this to the opposite side. So I'll mirror it across the top axis. So we have a top and a bottom now. Now I'll copy from point to point these 2 curves, the point being the intersection, and I'm going to copy it to all of the other intersection points. So 2 points, right click, intersection, these 2, and so on. Okay, confirm. So now, when I change my overlap offset, all of these curves are going to update accordingly. The next step is to erase these lines, these curves, and these ones. Okay, so this is what we are left with. And we'll use this to build up our overlapping curves using our 3-point curve. Now the important part of this is to ensure we have tangencies at the start and end points of our 3-point curve. So let's start off. Pick the tangent direction. We want to reverse that direction. Okay, so we have the tangent direction of our first point that we want to place at the end point of that arc. Let's set our entity filter onto critical. Okay, so now we can pick our next point. We don't need to set tangent directions for these. So we'll start off by snapping to the bottom of this curve. We'll then snap to the top, then the bottom. And finally, our last point, we want to set the tangent direction along this arc. Middle click. There we go. Okay, and we're going to continue to do this. Middle click. Let's start here. Tangent direction. Reverse direction. First point. Now the second point is going to go over the top of the other line. Okay, then down, then up, then right click, not right click, sorry, tangent direction, the arc, middle click. Let's continue. Tangent direction, reverse, this one's over, under, over, okay, I picked the wrong point there, unpick last. Okay, so here we've built up our overlapping curves. Attributes part. Let's see if they're working. 2. 1. Okay, so you can see we've built up our path prior to sweeping with our path having the overlap. Let's check out our scale factor. Okay, that's fine as well. Okay, we can concatenate again. Okay, it's picking the wrong ones. We're concatenating into 2 halves again. Okay, we have our 2 halves. We have our datum, we have our sketch that is all linked up. Now let's modify the sweep. That's fine. This time I'm not going to keep my end caps. Modify the next sweep. I'm not going to keep the end caps again. Okay, we don't need these morph commands, so I'm going to suppress them. That's from the last operation, from the last method. Now come to the heal tab and use the sew command to sew these 2 halves together. So we have one shape now. Let's erase the leftover curves, and I'll erase that datum plane at the end here. Middle click. Okay, I did that wrong. Obviously, undo, erase the datum plane, curves. I must have had it set to shape before. Middle click. Okay, let's save, and now let's play around with our values. Okay, in this case we do not need the overlap influence, so I'll get rid of that. Okay, we still have the scale factor. Say 1.2. Let's increase the braid arc radius, the separation. Say 0.6. Okay, we'll increase the overlap offset. Braid height. decrease the scale factor for a tighter braid, keeping our braid dimensions the same in terms of the braid height, etc. Okay, so this is it for the braid. And by thinking carefully before designing, we've been able to create a braid that has the variables attached to it, so that we can come in and create multiple variations of the braid and different sizes. Okay, now the advantage of this method using our curves instead of the morph command is that it is a bit more reliable. Okay, since we are more specific, instead of picking points like in the morph command, we've been more exact with our pick points because we're using the curves. Okay, but there are two methods there, and they both will come with their own advantages. In this case, I find the curve method to be slightly more reliable. However, we do not then get the option for the influence. Okay, maybe you don't want these overlaps to be quite so localized. With the morph command, you could change the influence so that they're not so localized, or more localized. Okay, so next up we can come in with our jump ring. Okay, I'll just drop these in there quickly. Jump ring and a pendant bail. Shape, you can morph these, merge them. And then move. I'm trying to grab the jump ring there. I can use the Alt key to sift between. I need to pick the shape. Holding down the Alt key, picking the other shape. Okay, now the trouble here is that if we then scale up or change the size of our, let me just move that there. If we change the size, okay, this jump ring is not going to update. It's going to stay where it was. Okay, so we can set up a different way to have this jump ring move so that it stays connected. We could use the move along direction, the direction being the y-axis, and the distance, right click to point, and the point will be on this edge. Well, we want it further up than that, so let's use a different strategy. I'll exit out of that. Let's come prior to the move. We'll delete that move. Let's insert a 2-point line. First point, middle of there. Second point, offset distance. Direction is the Y. And the distance, well, we'll start off with 2. Move, pick the jump ring using the Alt key, we're going to be doing point to point, picking the origin as our from point, to point, the end of the curve. Confirm. Okay, so this is how we've moved the jump ring. So if we change our scale factor, for example, it should stay at the top there. Okay, and it does. So now we need to do the same for our pendant bail. Okay, and of course we can set up variables for these values. For example, jump ring offset, and 2 seemed appropriate, and bail offset, let's start off with an 8. Okay, so when we come into that line, the 2-point line, we'll modify it, the second point, distance, expression, jump ring offset, let's come in with the second point straight away, second curve, sorry, first point, set it to the midpoint of that edge, second point, offset distance, reference point is the midpoint again, direction, y-axis, distance, okay, this is the bail offset. Confirm, play the jump ring move, now let's move the bail. Entity, the shape, from point, okay, from the origin, 2 point, end of this curve. Okay, we're going to want to drop this down a bit. Let's move the jump ring offset down, let's say 1.75. Okay, and the bail, let's say 6.5. Okay, so this is just for rendering. And of course we could come in and modify the dimensions of our bail and jump ring prior to merging them using the tweak tool. Let's erase those curves. This is the braid pendant completed. We'll save it. Let's see if it's working with the bail and jump ring. Okay, they're all moving nicely together.